Hey, welcome back everyone. We're again continuing our 5-day-a-week broadcasts Monday through Friday on the coronavirus, the CCP virus. We're of course here still broadcasting from my apartment in Queens, New York. We're going to talk about a recent arrest in China of a top-level Chinese Communist Party official and what this could possibly say about infighting at the high levels of the Chinese Communist Party. Also going to talk about recent deportations from the US to Latin America, Latin American countries speaking back against this and some of what's going on. Also going to talk about some of these different rumors with infected test kits. These test kits meant to test people for the virus. Before we jump into it, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, double check and make sure you're still subscribed, because we've been hearing from a lot of people actually saying that YouTube is somehow unsubscribing them. So double check. Now with that said, let's jump into it. And so we'll start with this recent arrest. The individual who was arrested is Sun Lijun. He's China's deputy security minister, and he has been dismissed and is now being probed for corruption. And under the Chinese Communist Party right now, corruption is a loaded term. We'll get into that. First, let's go into a bit about him. Sun Lijun was the top Chinese Communist Party official in charge of the Hong Kong security during the protests. He was also director of the first bureau of the Ministry of Public Security's 26th Bureau. Now, in China, the Ministry of Public Security is imagine like a combination of the CIA and the FBI. And he was also deputy director of the 610 office, which I've covered before is like China's Gestapo, extrajudicial police force dedicated to carry out human rights abuses against Falun Gong practitioners. 70 million to 100 million people in China. Forced arrests, torture, live organ harvesting, you name it. He's being investigated for, quote, serious violations of discipline and law, but the Chinese Communist Party is giving no further details on what that means. And of course, violations of discipline and law, this goes back to Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign. You may have heard about these different top-level Chinese Communist Party officials who have been purged, sentenced, and so on under Xi Jinping. Some people saw this as Xi consolidating power. There's more to it than that. Most of the individuals being targeted through this have been with the rival political faction under a man named Jiang Zemin. Now, Jiang Zemin was the leader of the Chinese Communist Party from 2 leaders ago. Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping. Jiang rose to power through the Tiananmen Square massacre. He also launched the persecution against Falun Gong, which was explained by Sun Lijun being in charge of this. One of the individuals in charge of the 610 office would be targeted in the anti-corruption campaign. But there's a bit more to it than this. He was last seen in public in Wuhan in March, and that's according to Chinese Communist Party state media. And so it's not quite clear if you can ever believe everything they say, of course. But the Epoch Times, we conducted some interviews with some of our sources in China about what's going on. Again, Epoch Times were blacklisted in China, proudly blacklisted, because it means we can tell the truth about what's happening there. But because we have never shied away from telling people what's going on with China, we've never folded to their pressure, it means that individuals who want to get information out usually come to us. And so we have some good sources there, and we're going to talk about what they said. So they claim Sun Lijun's charges were not about Hong Kong or the pandemic. They say this is about recent rumors of attempted coups in China. Because, of course, there's a lot of speculation that since he was in charge of the, security forces in Hong Kong, on the Chinese Communist Party side, that maybe this is about something he did in Hong Kong. According to these sources, that was not the case. Now, you all may remember I had this story recently talking about the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, moving forces into Beijing. There were rumors about this. There were photos of it showing buses of what looked like PLA troops moving into Beijing. There were mixed articles. It was never really clear what exactly happened. There were rumors in China of a couple issues around this. There was also rumors of an alleged weapons cache and an attempted coup. It's very difficult to confirm these, but allegedly Sun Lijun's arrest could be tied to this, according to these sources. Now, these sources claim that his position, or they noted, I should say, his position was one that could have determined the outcome had there been a coup. And this would make sense given that he was in charge of one of the top people at least, in charge of the Ministry of Public Security's 26th Bureau, and also in charge of one of the top people at least, in charge of the 610 office. Now, we've noted on recent episodes talking about some of these leaked documents we had gotten out of China, specifically about the 610 office. They're an extrajudicial police force. They can override local policies. In other words, if Xi Jinping gave orders and it was carried out by a local government official, the 610 office could hypothetically override those. And these documents noted that. Not only that, but they were able to engage in foreign diplomatic missions. They can engage in diplomatic missions under the Chinese Communist Party. They also noted that Xi's trusted deputy minister of the Ministry of Public Security, Wang Xiaohong, recently appointed new personnel to Sun Lijun's team. And this is believed to be a sign that Xi Jinping is clearing out elements within the circle of Sun Lijun. Now, on to the next one. There's signs of poor security at the Wuhan P4 laboratory. The Chinese Communist Party had posted photographs from inside the lab, bragging about how great it was and all these things, and China's on the front lines of vaccine development and that kind of thing. They published these on the internet in 2018. They've recently deleted them. But of course, they're still around, being the internet. And Chinese netizens have recently pulled these up and noted a few different things. One of them being that there's a photograph of a scientist reaching into a refrigerator where they were keeping, I think each one contained something like 1,500 different virus samples. And they pointed out that the protective tape on the door appears to be broken. And they're saying that if even the door has, issues with the protective tape, what about the rest of the laboratory? Now, going on to, the Chinese Communist Party is going to continue holding its sessions, but they're doing it over video teleconference. And this is significant given the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has been claiming that it's reopening the country, that it's safe for everyone to go back to work, but apparently not safe enough for Chinese, top-level Chinese Communist Party officials to get together. You may remember we've talked a bit about the initial reopening of China when the Chinese Communist Party declared it was safe to go back to work, the virus was over. But when they declared that, the largest Chinese Communist Party meeting they have each year was still delayed. In other words, safe for everyone to go back to work other than top-level Chinese Communist Party officials. And despite all the propaganda about things being fine and dandy there, they're now going to be holding their meetings via teleconference. Does suggest that they don't believe the situation is as good as they claim it is. Now on to some of the issues with the United States, Latin America. Some interesting stories on this. So Trump tweeted on April 20th, in light of the attack from the invisible enemy, as well as the need to protect the jobs of our great American citizens, I will be signing an executive order to temporarily suspend immigration into the United States. Presumably, he means all immigration, not just illegal immigration. Now, but the context of this, ABC News had an article that's saying 75% of migrants deported to Guatemala on a single flight tested positive for the coronavirus, according to the Guatemalan health minister. Now, they're claiming that Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Mexico are asking the United States to stop deportations over the virus. It does not currently appear Trump is going to do that. But this is interesting. Now, on one note, of course, ABC, they're painting this from the perspective of these Latin American countries, and from specifically suggesting that the people who were deported may have caught the virus in the United States and are bringing it back to their own countries, which is what the local governments there are claiming. From the U.S. perspective, of course, it could also be said that maybe these individuals coming here illegally are bringing it while infected and bringing the virus into the country. Not saying that all these countries don't already have outbreaks. In fact, a lot of countries in Latin America, it's pretty serious right now. There have been some videos of what's happening in Peru, for example, or Venezuela. This really does seem like politics, playing politics, because of course most of these Latin American countries, again, already have virus outbreaks. It appears to be, at least in my personal analysis, that this is more about jobs, as Trump is noting in his tweet. And of course, he's not just taking a harsher stance on illegal immigration, but now, it seems, temporarily suspending all immigration into the United States. And in contrast to this, the Chinese Communist Party is easing its coronavirus border controls with other countries, according to Wall Street Journal. And this is interesting because, again, right now in China, we've had several stories on it. The Chinese Communist Party is renewing lockdowns in some provinces. And so while the Chinese Communist Party is renewing lockdowns, of course, being in the context of the virus now spreading again and being serious enough where they have to lock things down, they're going to reopen and lighten up restrictions on people traveling abroad. This is one of the big things they're being criticized of right now with the early lockdowns in Wuhan, because, the epicenter of the virus. Because when they locked down things in Wuhan and they were not allowing people in Wuhan to travel around China, they were still allowing people in Wuhan to travel outside of China. And a lot of people are calling out the Chinese Communist Party right now for that, because they're saying, well, were you intentionally spreading the virus abroad? Were you intentionally letting these people who may have been infected, when you did not trust the safety of them traveling around China because you feared infections? Were you doing this because you knew you didn't care that they would infect other countries, or because you wanted that to happen? Now, next up, we're going to talk about the Chinese Communist Party's systems of economic warfare. I'll start with some of the news around this and go deeper into it. First of all, Peter Navarro, of course, one of Trump's top advisors on China, is saying China may be keeping coronavirus data for commercial gain. Maybe the Chinese Communist Party is not being totally open about its information, not just because it's trying to withhold information to make itself look good, but because it wants to capitalize on the pandemic, of course, this global outbreak, in order to benefit itself economically. And in broader context of that, this is what the Chinese Communist Party is being accused of, not just in the United States, but in a lot of parts of the world. NATO just warned nations of China taking over its core industries. If you remember, we talked about India just recently blocking Chinese foreign direct investment. In the UK, they're also warning about this. UK intelligence services are saying that China is planning to capitalize on the pandemic to buy up companies when they're at their weakest. And this NATO report also notes that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, may try to buy majority control of U.S. and European companies, and is warning of CCP ownership in critical infrastructure, and how if it gains control over critical infrastructure, namely with Huawei and 5G and these types of things, that it could present a national security threat going forward. Now, on the broader context of economic warfare and what the Chinese Communist Party does with these things, I talk a lot about unrestricted warfare, talking about war without morals and how to wage war on a country without engaging in troop-on-troop combat. To understand unrestricted warfare, it's simple. Just think like this. What would you want to achieve through warfare? And how could you achieve those exact same means without having to engage in troop-on-troop combat? And with the Chinese Communist Party being a communist regime, every single part of the country can be weaponized. Every single part of the country can be controlled by top-level authorities. Foreign direct investment is a weapon. Business is a weapon. And so we talk about business warfare, economic warfare. These are actually different. Business warfare would be targeting individual companies, say death by 1,000 cuts approach. Economic warfare would be targeting specifically things that would affect the GDP of a country. For example, rice that can grow in arid environments and these types of things. The Chinese Communist Party has many different public programs around this, notably Project 863 and more recently China 2025. Before Project 863 was seen as one of the guiding programs of the Chinese Communist Party directing intellectual property theft. And Project 863 identified different categories of high technology that the Chinese Communist Party wanted to steal, develop, use, hook and by crook, whatever, cyber attacks, you name it, to, quote, catch up fast and surpass the West. Now, China 2025 was somewhat of an update to that, but of course included other things as well, like, promoting the China model, One Belt, One Road initiative, and these things. And when it comes to individual kind of more finite operations, they have several other programs. For example, the Torch program, 973 program, 211 program. And so for the Chinese Communist Party, economic warfare, business warfare, this is open. They don't even try to hide it. This is war in the open, overt espionage, call it what you want. And it does seem that countries are finally starting to catch on to it. Now, moving on, there have been some very strange stories, actually, about testing kits being infected with the coronavirus, with the CCP virus. Of course, we've heard a lot of stories, which we've talked about here, about test kits coming from China and being unusable, being non-functional, but also some very strange stories where the test kits themselves appear to be infected with the virus. Now, starting off, Ars Technica had a story saying the CDC test kits that had failed these tests were found to be tainted with the coronavirus, with the CCP virus. They say a federal investigation found the CDC was not following protocol. The CDC was sending states infected test kits in early February. And so, in other words, test kits that the CDC was sending to different states within the United States were infected with the virus. And so people going to get tested with these kits were themselves being tested with kits that contain the virus. And of course, this allegedly has happened because of poor manufacturing practices at the CDC. Hopefully that is the case. We'll find out, hopefully, more about this. Now, the South China Morning Post had a story. Notably, South China Morning Post isn't necessarily free of Chinese Communist Party influence. Actually, on this program, I'll be, of course, I use sources from across the board, including some that are Chinese outlets. And with Chinese outlets, of course, you can't believe everything they say. I guess the same with media here, too. So they're reporting that a U.S. university stops using Chinese testing kits after some were found to be contaminated. And when they say contaminated, it does not necessarily mean contaminated with the virus. It could just be, having other issues. And so they report the University of Washington's School of Medicine had airlifted tens of thousands of kits from a Shanghai factory. They're reporting that liquid in small percentage of vials changed color. This is during the tests of these test kits, an indication of bacterial growth, and some appeared cloudy too. Now, if there's bacterial growth or, say, impurities found on these, we'll have to see exactly what they were. But there's a couple things that interest me about this. One being the connection with Shanghai. The second being the broader context of what has happened in Shanghai with other test kits. So you may remember in a previous episode I talked about how the UK had found that virus test kits were contaminated with the virus. And in that episode, of course, I said these were Chinese kits. Some people commented, of course, these came from a Luxembourg company, which was Eurofins. It's a bit deeper than that. Eurofins manufactures its test kits, apparently, in China, at least some of them. And so these were, even though it's a Luxembourg-owned company, these are still Chinese-sourced kits, it appears. Now, there's a great Reddit thread I found. I usually don't cite Reddit, but this user, of course, provided original sources, and I just want to give credit to them because they put the whole thing together. So this is from u /K_E_LUK. Thank you for your great research. I include all of the original source links discussed in each episode in the description in a Google Doc link, so if you want to go check out those yourself, you can. The thread notes that the Luxembourg company Eurofins has 4 food testing labs in China, including one in Hong Kong, that were developing these test kits. Now, this is from the March 4th press release from Eurofins. It states, quote, Eurofins food testing laboratories in China have already developed testing methods for SARS-2 CoV to help manufacturers resume business activities. Testing is now increasingly being open to highly qualified, independent, high-complexity molecular testing laboratories. Eurofins laboratories are finalizing the development of their own tests and sourcing some commercially available ones. They started working with a Shanghai company called Pharma Resources. and they announced this on February 3rd. When it comes to this recent case of this university, of course, this is one of the things that piqued my interest because Pharma Resources is, of course, in Shanghai, and Eurofins also increased their own operations in Shanghai around this. Now, on February 26th, Eurofins announced that they were expanding their central laboratory in Shanghai. And a March 30th article from The Telegraph stated, quote, one of the suppliers, the Luxembourg-based firm Eurofins, sent an email on Monday morning to government laboratories in the UK, warning that a delivery of key components called, quote, probes and primers, had been contaminated with coronavirus and would be delayed. The firm admitted that there had been an issue, quote unquote, an issue, and insisted other private providers had suffered the same problems. Now, when I hear stories about, say, one anomaly, one issue taking place, of course, it's possible it happened by accident. If you're having issues taking place across the board, across different companies, that is a very different issue. And of course, the CDC now being found to have had similar issues, apparently. So what does the CDC and these different virus test kit companies, what do they all have in common when it comes to their kits being infected with this virus? And if this, same problem, quote unquote, had been suffered by other companies, then how safe were the virus test kits coming out at that time? Does this mean then that different countries that were analyzing test kits coming from China and found them to be defective were also finding that they were infected? What were the exact problems? Looking back now, it was never really made clear. Of course, some of them were non-functional, we know, but it's interesting now that talking about this issue with the CDC, and I'll read this again, were looked into through a federal investigation, and while they were called failed test kits, it found that they were tainted with the coronavirus. Does this mean that other quote-unquote failed test kits were also infected? Can't give hard answers. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this seems pretty serious to me. So, now with that said, folks, of course, we're going to be continuing these broadcasts Monday through Friday, so please don't forget to tune in. And of course, if you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, click the notification bell. You'll get alerts when our new videos are up. And even if you subscribed, apparently double check you are still subscribed, because we've been told that some people seem to be getting magically unsubscribed. So double check, please. And of course, folks, appreciate the support. I do read your comments. Really appreciate all the support you all give. And if you have questions, comments for me, leave them there. Every Monday I will be going over some comments, reading them on the show. And that said, please stay safe. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time.